Hello, class. This is Professor Joseph Holbrook. We are discussing religious methods of analysis of religious studies, and today we're going to look at Chapter 14 of Livingston's book on the sacred. And so today we're going to look at secularization and new religious movements and contemporary fundamentalism. That's quite a bit to cover. Secularization, Pluralism and Revitalization Movements, Chapter 14. Secularism is a doctrine of how society ought to be. Religion and politics ought to be separated, according to the secularist doctrine. They should be protected against one another to ensure freedom of religion, as well as religion-free politics. The ultimate aim is to ensure peace. Nationalism is the secular narrative that establishes the nation as the legal identity, thus a secular basis for legitimacy rather than religious basis. It became harder with secularism for monarchs to claim divine right, and more important for them to claim to serve the interests of the people. A good bit of secularism, or the secularist approach, comes from the Enlightenment. European secularism shaped the struggles against the enforced religious conformity following 1648. What happened in 1648 was the Peace of Westphalia. It was the end of the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 that tore Europe apart between Protestants and Catholics. The 30 Years' War was so bad that by the end of it, in 1648, 50% of all German males had died. The population of German males had dropped by 50%. And so this left a very bad taste in the mouth of Europeans about religious conflicts affecting the political sphere. And so in the Peace of Westphalia, they came together, the heads of state came together and came to an agreement that each head of state's religion would be the official religion of that state. For example, the king of Sweden was Lutheran, so Swedish people would have to be Lutheran. The king of Spain was Catholic, so all Spanish subjects would have to be Catholic. There's a strong French doctrine of laicite, which was the product of unchurching struggles against priestly authorities. This comes out of the Enlightenment and the ensuing French Revolution that was in part a reaction against the church as well as against the nobility. The first and second estates of the French nation were the nobility. The first estate and the second estate was the priesthood, the church officials. The third estate was everyone else. Middle class, bourgeois, working class, poor peasants. And the third estate paid all the taxes, but the first and second estate had all the privileges. And so there was a very negative reaction against the hegemonic control of the church in France, coming to this doctrine of laity, or laicite. Anti-clericalism merged with national ideology that gave shape and form to secularism. It positioned itself as a dimension of social struggle and liberation that produced a militant laity, or a militant laicite, secularism. Laicite relies on the division between private life and the public sphere. In 1905, French law established state secularism, partly as a reaction to the church's anti-Semitic role during the Dreyfus affair about 10 years earlier. 1958, the French Constitution declared France a secular republic. In 2011, France banned broadcasting of Catholic sermons and Russian Orthodox Christmas liturgies. I might also add that in Latin America, in the 19th century, there were numerous struggles. This is after the French Revolution and after the wars of independence of Latin American nations against Spain. There were numerous struggles of that included a strong element of anti-clericalism, in which the church in Mexico and Argentina, Colombia, and other countries was disestablishing the Catholic Church and taking its wealth and properties. There's been a surge in revitalization movements, the significant changes in the patterns of religious life rather than religious decline. A lot of proponents of secularism was predicting religious decline as an inevitable result of modernization, but actually the reverse has happened. In the West, there have been New Age religions and religious political Protestant revivalist movements. In the Middle East, you have increased fundamentalism and revolutionary religious groups, such as the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the rise of the Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt, and also Al-Qaeda, calling for the establishment of a religious state under Sharia law. Actually, this book was published before the rise of ISIS, but ISIS is the logical end result of the Al-Qaeda call for a religious state using Sharia law. So now you have the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq operating under Sharia law. There's also been a technological revolution which has had a role in the growth and influence of new religious groups. It tends to accentuate differences and heightens tensions, but it also can at times point to essential underlying similarities. Wilfred Cantwell Smith said that religious diversity disrupts community. Religious fundamentalism is a worldwide phenomenon resisting modernization. One example would be Islamic Shiites of Iran, which are Islamic fundamentalists, the Jewish Gush Emunim, the Bloc of the Faithful. Also, there's the religious right in U.S. politics. An example of that would be the TV evangelist Pat Robertson. Also, the influence of the religious right in the Republican Party. All of the above groups feel the threat of modernity, and they feel like it must be resisted at all costs. They're basically resistance movements, cultural resistance movements. Now, it's important, I think, to point out that fundamentalism does not equal terrorism. Islamic fundamentalists may be very conservative and very traditionally oriented around tradition. That does not mean that they resort to terrorism. The same for any other religious fundamentalist group. Characteristics of fundamentalists is that they have a divinely ordained worldview. They believe they have a divinely ordained worldview with a sacred text. It may be the Torah, the Quran, or the Bible. They feel dispossessed. They fervently and militantly are counteractive in their reaction to cultural modernity. And they reify external threats into an evil object. And among American fundamentalists, there's a belief in the Antichrist or the Beast in the book of Revelation, identified during the Cold War with Russia and communism, but later, since 2011, it's been identified with terrorism and Saddam Hussein as the axis of evil. Also, there's Islamic fundamentalists, which would include the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Iranian Revolution, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram in Nigeria, who all say that the great Satan is the United States. In American Protestant fundamentalism, it began in the 19th century. It's associated with a movement within several Protestant denominations in the United States, which reached its zenith in the 1920s. The Protestant fundamentalist distinctive view of an inerrant Bible remains the bedrock and the source of the fundamentalist message. The belief is that the power of interpretation lies with the individual. There was a conference in 1905 at Niagara, which defined 5 points of fundamentalism for American Protestants: the verbal inerrancy of the Bible, the divinity of Jesus Christ, the virgin birth, the substitutionary theory of atonement, and the bodily resurrection and return of Christ. From 1905 to 1920, American fundamentalism reached its peak. It saw the founding of the World Christian Fundamentals Association in 1919 and the Public of the Fundamentals, a testimony of truth, which was published and distributed between 1910 and 1915 in 12 brief manifestos that were sent free to over 3 million Protestant leaders in the United States. In 1956, Jerry Falwell began his Baptist ministry, was born in 1956 and began later his Baptist ministry in Lynchburg, Virginia. Falwell created the moral majority in the 1970s and launched the culture wars. Creation science is also a factor within fundamentalism, which challenges the idea of biological evolution. It holds to a young earth view, and it has raised deep questions about the law and constitution. Fundamentalism also may tend to be premillenarian, believing in the literal 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ. As far as radical Islam, there's several different streams or dynamics, groups within radical Islam. One of them, representing Sunni Islam, began in the 1700s, the 18th century, with Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. He was a Saudi Arabian, and he eventually influenced the future king of Saudi Arabia to adopt Wahhabism as a very radical, conservative, purist form of Sunni Islam. The Saudi Arabia, as well as ISIS, are both Wahhabist Sunnis. Ayatollah Khomeini was born in 1902, died in 1989. He became the leader of the Shia movement in Iran. He combined both political and religious authority. He was the leader of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and he established the world's first Islamic Republic in Iran. Sufi mystics believe in the perfect man, holder of the chain of existence with which the cycle is completed. He is God's great sign, created in God's image. The Shia perfect man, or the philosopher king. This is leadership combined with mystical illuminism that is viewed as Muhammad and the later 12 Imams were guardians of the true religious traditions. This is Shia theology or thinking. The leaders and movements of radical Islam. Recent radical Islamic movements look to the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet or traditions of the Prophet, the sources by which they can carry out their renewal, that is, a faithfulness to God's revelation and authentic Islam. These movements glorify the struggle, sacrifices, and the victories of the great successors to the prophets as role models. They also glorify martyrdom, particularly within the Shiite movement. Their goal is to reconstitute an Islamic state and overthrow all the policies and practices that have engendered a moral decadence and impiety, and the erosion of Islam's way of life. This is the end of Chapter 14. I hope you'll read it, and good luck with the test. We'll talk about it and discuss it this week. Thank you.